Good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, Tom, can you hear me okay?
I can.
All righty. Well, welcome back to our town hall series for this crazy COVID pandemic that's going on right now. Like our previous weeks, I just want to remind you that if you are having audio issues, to please use the call-in number that was sent to you with your GoToWebinar registration, as we are finding that this is working a lot better than using computer audio and giving people less glitches along the way. Just a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Tom. Get my slide deck to advance here. Here are all of our expert panelists that we have joining us today. So we have Christy, Phil, Tom, Chad, and Steve, and Katie with us this afternoon. Just a reminder, we are here for 2 hours. We have allotted 2 hours of our time for any questions and answers after the presentations are finished. And some housekeeping items: you can customize the screen that you are seeing right now by just using the GoToWebinar screen viewer option. And all attendees, you are muted upon entry here, so just to minimize kind of our feedback we have going on. And we do get tons and tons and tons of questions. So if you could, please drop your questions into the subject buckets that are listed under the second bullet here in pertaining to workforce, technology, regulatory, cash flow, and human resources. It gives us on the back end of this kind of an easier time when sorting through and being able to address these questions with our experts. The slide deck that you are seeing now and throughout this presentation is available for download in the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel. There are a few slides with information that our experts thought might be helpful to you along the way here today. It isn't a full formal presentation with every single slide or topic that they are talking to, but it is something for you. And just a reminder again, if you are experiencing audio issues, please use the dial-in option that coordinates with your registration rather than your computer audio. And just kind of a little disclaimer here before passing it off to Tom: all of our information that's being presented today is based on what we know as of April 7th, 2020 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So this is a very fluid situation, and we just want to remind you of that. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Tom.
Thank you, Kaylee, and good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you again for joining us again this week. Seems like we just did this, but another week has gone by. I think this is the 4th time we've done these sessions, and as Kaylee said, I can't emphasize enough what a fluid situation this is. Just last evening, the Department of Treasury issued quite a few FAQ questions on the Paycheck Protection Program loan, and I know is going to be a very hot topic of today and a focus of our team, and I know that's probably something you're all are interested in hearing about. So the information changes rapidly, and we're going to try to give you, our best overview that we can, and keep doing that as we go forward. As Kaylee said, we've allotted 2 hours today. I think our comments will be a little bit shorter this week than they've been in the prior weeks. We do have a lot of information we want to get in front of you, but we also want to allow as much time as we can for Q&A. And as Gaby said, any that we don't get to, we certainly will get to over the course of the week. I believe last week's questions were sent out to all the attendees via a link. We try to get that out sometime around the weekend, and we keep updating that again as information changes throughout the week. As I said, today you're going to hear a lot on the Paycheck Protection Program. Christy will certainly also be giving you updates as they've occurred on the workforce side. I'm going to be giving you some updates on the tax side. Not a whole lot changed there, but just a couple of observations. And we do have Phil and Katie on board too with some pretty valuable information, I think, in regards to IT and in regards to human resources. We keep monitoring things. We've heard around 4 of stimulus may be coming that we originally heard may be focused on infrastructure. We don't know if that's going to happen or not, because now there's some talk that instead of that, we may get CARES Act number 2. A lot of discussion that more money needs to be available for the small business loans and such. even hearing that there may be a second round of stimulus payments out to individuals. So we're certainly going to keep on top of all that, and if that happens, we'll give you as much detail as we can. But assuming that does not happen in the next week, assuming that the focus remains on trying to understand and implement what we have, we are going to try to do a little bit of a transition in next week's section from more of a pivot from what has happened to what might be happening in the weeks to come. Trying to look at a proactive, future-looking look, how to take all this new information and apply it to your business and understand. So with that being the case, we have introduced today some polling questions that we're going to be asking you throughout the webinar. We just ask that you click on the response. Nothing real deep here. They're matter more of opinion questions than everything else. But we're just interested in how all of you are feeling. And that'll help us shape our comments for next week. So we may have a few new topics next week, maybe even a few new faces joining us for the presentation next week. As we say every week, the Stambaugh Ness communication lines are certainly open at all times. Please don't hesitate to call, email, reach out to your SN rep. Contact us at the contact page at www.stambaughness.com. And, we will continue to also try to be proactive in reaching out to all of you as well. So keep your eye on email. Keep your eye on our website. When you land on our website, you probably are going to see the COVID-19 lead page. If you click down into that, there's a couple of valuable tools there. There's a cash flow triage that walks you through some of the steps you might want to be taking to manage your cash flow going forward. And there's another document there that the team has put together called 6 Action Steps to Manage Your Business During COVID-19. So we hope you find those very helpful as well. We'll also be pushing our information out through social media. As we've talked about before, we have done some other more specialized webinars that are available on demand at our website. That would include webinars that talk about how to deal and track the things you need to track under the new provisions in the Vision and Vantage Point software, as well as Azira. And certainly also remember that all of these town hall sessions are recorded. If you missed something or you want to look at it again or you just couldn't be with us for the whole time, they are available on demand as well. So last, before I turn it over here, just a reminder, we will be back again next week, Tuesday, April 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern. A reminder, emails will be coming out to remind you of that, and we have extended our sessions at least through the end of April. We'll see what happens. I know there's been some glimmers of good news coming out of the last couple of days. It looks like maybe the number of new cases in some of the hotspots has declined. The stock market seems to be responding well over the last couple of days. So we'll certainly keep our fingers crossed that we're on the right track. And I think that's a tribute to all of you for taking the appropriate steps, listening to what the advice has been and helping us get through this. But forever long it lasts, we'll be here for you. So next we're going to turn it over. Chad Bumbaugh is going to lead us off today with some discussion on cash flow. So Chad, it's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. And let me see if we get the video working here. So no sooner than we had signed off on last week's webinar did we learn of some new final interim rules that came out and were published by the Treasury, and also a new application that became available shortly after that. So it's been quite a week. What we thought we were on the verge of the application process opening up when we last spoke, it took quite a few turns between then and April 3rd when it was to open. And really, I would say until yesterday, when it seems like virtually all the banks now are accepting the application. So it's been an interesting week. I did want to mention, Tom alluded to some potential additional funding under the CARES Act. Senator Rubio saw a recent tweet that they're talking about maybe having some additional funding earmarked potentially as soon as this Thursday. So if you are worried about your application and there being funds available under the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, the word is that there may be another $200 to $250 billion that the Senate's going to take action on and had discussions on this week. So those funds may be supplemented here in the near term. But again, I still think it is important to get your applications in if you haven't already. So that kind of sets the stage on what's happened a little bit. I'm not going to necessarily retread the application and everything that we hit on last week. I really like to focus on the Treasury frequently asked question documents that came out sometime between last night and this morning. I'm not sure when. I checked the site yesterday, I think early afternoon. Looked again first thing this morning, and there were 17 new answers to many commonly asked questions that I've seen on these webinars. So let's take a few minutes and hit on some of the highlights of those, and then also provide maybe just a couple suggestions on how they might impact your application for the PPP if you've not already made that. So I'm not going to hit on all the questions, just the ones that I think are relevant to most. Questions 2 and 3 just clarify a couple things under the eligibility requirements, and it still remains mostly entities under 500, but they did clarify that the definitions of small business is really also impacted by the NIACS code. So there are revenue and employee sizes that are relevant for certain NAICS codes, and if you're in those codes, you can use a greater of 500 or the standards that they publish for those. It's called the Small Business Concerns application. And then also they noted something new that I had not previously seen, and they call it the Small Business Concern Test. And this is if an entity does not have a net worth over 15 million, and their average net income for the last 2 years is not more than 5 million. So even if you're over the employee count, they're saying that you can also apply this Small Business Concerns Test. It's the first that I've seen this. I'm not sure how many companies are going to fall into that exact bucket, but it is something that may get a couple more entities eligible for these funds than maybe we had originally thought. They also clarified with these FAQs that you don't have to meet all the definitions in Section 3 of the SBA guidance, only the ones that are really set forth in the guidance in the interim final rule. There was some talk about potentially there being a little bit of inconsistencies in the wording. They did clear that up. Questions 4 through 6 for companies that are involved with businesses that have owners that are invested in different types of businesses. Maybe they have 2 or 3 businesses under their umbrella. They clarified that the lenders themselves aren't required to certify the affiliations. Essentially, an affirmation from the business, the applicant, is sufficient for satisfying these rules. Again, there's a lot of concern by the lenders on what level of validation they're required to make for these loans. It did clarify that with one of the questions. And it also clarified also that these rules do apply, other than the carve-out in the interim final rule where they removed some things for NAICS Code 72, the food and certain other industries where they said that 500 employee count is not as relevant. And really those rules are meant to just determine if you're eligible or not, that 500 head count. Really, there's no other implications that we've seen clarified thus far in regards to the affiliation rules. So question 7, I think is one of the most important and most hotly debated, followed by 1 or 2 of the other questions here that I'll hit on. But this is the $100,000 cap that I think most folks are familiar with. And question 7 finally came out and clarified that the cap applies to the cash compensation paid by a business, not to the non-cash benefits like the health insurance, the retirement benefits, the payroll taxes, items like that. So the cap that drives the loan amount is truly the $100,000 of wages for those employees. So I thought that was an important clarification that really, in my mind, was long overdue. I'm going to skip now question 14, hit on the clarification of the time period for the employees and the payroll costs. So what is the period that's supposed to drive this loan? And that was clarified as either calendar year 19, so 2019's wages, or the preceding 12 months from the application date. So both methods are acceptable. That seemed to be where it was headed last week, but we did not have that in writing. Now we do. And also, just some considerations there. Obviously, the calendar year is going to be easiest. You can gather your 941s and provide those to the lenders so that they can do the due diligence they need to on those documents. And really, in my mind, unless you had significant employee growth during 2019, that you would be really shortchanging yourself on the loan. I would suggest for most businesses that you use the calendar year just because of the simplicity and getting your application in as timely as possible. Again, to get the funds to you for the businesses in need. This question also talks about how to determine the average employment levels for the headcount type questions. So I'll just defer you to that question in the guidance from the Treasury for the details, but it does hit on those guidelines as well, which I had not seen previously defined in the guidance. Question 15 hits on something that was another commonly asked item, payments to independent contractors by businesses. These were expressly noted as not being in the borrowing base. The independent contractor payments really are for those individuals working as the contractor, for them to have the ability to take out a PPP loan. So again, a business that pays both W-2 employees and 1099 employees can only drive PPP loan value through the W-2 wages. That was question 15. Question 16, this is one that again, I'm really glad to see the guidance be formalized. It's about the impact of federal tax withholding. So the income tax withholdings taken on employees' wages and the PPP loans. And they did clarify that there really is meant to be no reduction in the PPP loan because of the employee or the federal income taxes withheld from the employee's paycheck. And that's consistent, again, with what a lot of us had debated and thought, but again, the rules just were not clear. They made some wording in there that just seemed like it was inconsistent, or maybe it required those to be carved out. And I will give credit to our professional organization, AICPA. They've really been trying to work hard to push some of these standardizations, and a lot of what we're seeing in these FAQs, I think, were consistent with some of the guidance that they were working with the legislation to provide. And I do believe there are some further clarifications yet to come. So I think a lot of the common questions are answered, but there are still some uncertainties that remain. I'm going to hit on one of those other uncertainties that really wasn't addressed in the FAQs, but it's one of the other common questions I've been getting, and is that can I do both an EID L loan, the emergency loans, the non-forgivable loan, and the PPP, which is the forgivable loan? And my understanding is, yes, you can apply for both. We talked last week about the $10,000 grant that the EID L loans offered, the emergency disaster loans, and really you're not needing to take the EID L loan to obtain that grant. That still exists. Again, the funding there was limited. I'm not sure if it's been fully earmarked to date or not. But the thing that we've learned is that really only the PPP loan will survive if you do take both. So the EID L loan rolls into the PPP loan and you move forward from there. So they did clarify kind of how those two loans interact a little bit. You can apply for both. You can only have one, is the best understanding that I have to date. So just a couple of general comments, and before I turn it over to Tom for a couple polling questions here to get your input. We are seeing as many banks are working through the logistics of this program and trying to get their systems built and their infrastructure to support this. We are unfortunately seeing some banks, I'll call it backing out or maybe reducing their level of involvement in the program. Some have capped the number of the loans to a certain dollar amount. Others are now saying that only entities of a certain size can apply. And this is on top of entities or banks that were saying previously that only entities that were a current customer could apply. So what does that mean? Well, if you're having a hard time, finding a lender to take your application, reach out to us. I think we can help with that. We have some avenues that we've been working, and also there are several banks that are taking applications from non-customers, and we can just kind of gauge your situation and where you're at. And the importance of this, and as I mentioned earlier, is not just to get the money in faster, but there is another wave of applicants coming on April 10th, and this is the self-employed and independent contractors. So even if there is additional funding, there may be delays in processing just the volume of applications that are going to hit when this next wave comes through. We have just heard gigantic numbers of applications that the banks are receiving, and they're trying to process those the best they can and as timely as they can, and they're learning. And I feel for them right now what they're going through, so another round is coming, and if you have everything in place now, I think it does benefit you. The other thing on the bank front I want to touch upon is just the discrepancies in the information requests that we are still seeing from the banks. Some are requesting things like I-9s, estimates of the forgiveness amounts on the back end during the application process, and some other financial information that when we look at the requirements as they're written, it really seems to be a little more than necessary. Each lender has their own underwriting and due diligence standards, so certainly I can understand some deviation. But just wanted to make you aware that we are seeing some things that may be a little inconsistent with the intent. And if you see that, my suggestion would be to talk to your bank, make sure that ask them to understand why you need that, and the chances are they may be still learning as well, as we all are right now, about these requirements. And the last item I'm going to touch upon is I've gotten a lot of questions over the last week to 10 days about the intent of the funds, and I'm not going to get too philosophical with this, but just, should I take the money? That's really what the question boils down to. And, there are requirements and affirmations that are needed to be made in regards to the need for the loan. And I think when we look at the situation that we're in as a country today, and the intent of this funding, which is, to shore up businesses, to provide cash flow support, to keep people employed, to keep businesses ready to resume operations when we return to the normalcy that we're used to and desire, there's going to be a ramp-up period. And I think the government recognizes that, and that's why the wording is maybe a little nebulous in regards to how the need is asked about. But when we look at the horizon today, there are still significant uncertainties that exist, even for businesses that have strong balance sheets, decent cash flow, and that you're able to still generate some revenue. You really look at this and say, well, what is it going to look like in 2 to 3 months? We might be out there generating the revenue, issuing the invoices. What are our collections going to look like? What's our volume going to be in 2 to 3 months? And at that point in time, will there be funding available? Remember, there's a June 30 date right now where these loans sunset. So I think it just as you're walking through that in your mind and thinking about the need, don't sell yourselves short, I guess is where I'll leave that comment. None of us know what it's going to look like in a week, 2 weeks, let alone 2 months. So just keep that in mind in regards to the intent of these loans. So it was mentioned earlier, we're going to look ahead a little bit in future weeks, talk about some of the modeling strategies and things like that, and moving more to the top of mind, what's it look like when we get to the normalcy stage of this. And Steve's going to cover a little more about some of the mechanics of the loans and how those things come into play. And you'll hear a little bit more about some of the employee strategies from Christy later on. So that's all I have. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom for our first 2 polling questions. Thank you, everyone, and stay safe and healthy.
Thanks, Chad. Very good information. I know those are a lot of questions people have been asking for the last week, so hopefully it helps clear some of that up. So with that, we are going to move into our actually 2 polling questions here. So Kaylee, if you would just advance the slide so everyone can see the question. The first question, we're just kind of looking at, now that we are 3 or 4 weeks into this thing, what you're seeing with your businesses. So the question is, have you seen a change in your projects, orders, workload? And our choices are that, yes, we've seen many things canceled. We've had quite an impact. Yes, many things maybe not canceled, but delayed or postponed. Or are you fortunate enough that so far it's been business as usual? So if you would just make one of those selections, and Kaylee will kind of tally the results there, and we'll share with everyone what we're seeing. Okay, so looks like certainly the majority are being affected. Looks like 9% with a pretty severe impact. The majority of the folks are seeing things pushed back, which I think is the norm. And I think that plays very much into Chad's comments that we hope to still be in a good spot when we come out the other end, but it's a big uncertainty now, and even those 28% that are still business as usual, I think it really kind of depends upon how far this goes and what we see. So that was our first question, but we do have a second one here for you. And this one is, what really around your confidence level? We've been suggesting that everyone put together a cash flow forecast. Hopefully most of you have done that, if not all of you. And our questions here, how confident are you in what you put together? Very confident, somewhat confident, not confident at all, or I don't even know where to start. So, and hopefully, please be honest on that, because these are very difficult questions, especially on the revenue side, to make a good estimate of where that's going to be. And hopefully this will help us. If these are things that you do need some help with, we can talk about that in next week's session. So as people answered there, Kaylee will share the results once we have a good response on this one. Okay, well, again, it looks like people are doing a pretty good job with that. Not extreme confidence, but 67% feeling pretty good. We do have 21% that not quite as confident, and 6% that haven't started yet. So certainly we'll shape some comments there. And if you do have any specific questions, please throw those out to us in the Q&A. And if not, if it's even more granular than that, please reach out to us. We're happy to help with that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve, who's going to give us some examples of the PPP program. So Steve.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. What is this, day 21 of the quarantine? It's been that long since I put on long pants, I can tell you that much. So let me dive into some of these slides. I think these are going to cover a few of the things that we've been getting questions on. Some of the stuff you may already know through your application process if you've already applied. But just to kind of break this down into the who, what, and when, you can see on the slides there that small businesses and sole proprietorships that have employees were able to start filing on April 3rd if your bank was open for business that day and accepting applications, which most of them were, at least at some point during the day. The sole proprietor portion of this is defined as not a corporation or a legal entity, more of a single member LLC, an individual filing a Schedule C, but has employees. Okay. Maybe not that Schedule C, I apologize. That comes over here onto the independent contracts and self-employed individuals. You're going to be eligible to file on April 10th. Okay. So April 10th starts that second wave of applications coming into the banks. That is, of course, interpreted as only an employee by themselves and single member LLCs with no other employees. They'll be filing on their Schedule Cs. That's good, that slide. Next one, Kaylee. So the details of the loans. As you're probably all aware, there was a slight change that was put out a couple of days ago from the initial communication that the loans are for 2 years and the interest rate now is at 1%. Was 5.5% to begin with, but that changed. They went to 1%. And you have a 6-month deferment. So from the day you get the loan, you have another 6 months until you have to make your first payment. Something to know is that during that 6-month deferment period, you will accrue interest, okay? Interest will be accrued during those 6 months at 1%. So that's kind of nice. Some of the eligible uses for the loan, I think we've gone over this as well before, is payroll, rent, utilities, and mortgage interest. And some of the things related to the rent, some questions that I know have come through is what kind of rent? Is this only building rent for construction companies? Does that qualify for equipment rent? Does it qualify for office equipment rent. And our interpretation of it is yes. There's not been anything to the contrary on that so far. We believe any lease that was in place by February 15th of 2020, those lease payments are eligible uses of these funds. Utilities are your normal utilities, anything you need to keep things going in the building. Mortgage interest is another area we've been getting a lot of questions. Typically, for anybody that plays Monopoly, you think mortgage is real estate. We believe, potentially here, that the mortgage interest also covers any equipment loans you may have. So the wording within the bill said that your mortgage should be over real property or personal property, which makes us believe that it's going to be any note interest, any note that you have that is supported by some personal property or real estate, that interest would qualify as eligible uses of the loan proceeds. Next slide. Okay, so the payroll costs, right? How to compute the payroll costs as defined within the bill and the subsequent information that came out from the U.S. Treasury. This is a monthly average cost for 2019. So what we're using, we're saying that 2019 is a good period to use, but you may also use the 12-month period leading up to the date of the loan. You can use either or. The easier way to go is, of course, the annual period of 2019, and that's mostly because of what you need to provide to support those costs. Most companies have not filed their payroll tax returns yet for the first quarter of 2020, so you wouldn't have that to support it, whereas you have all those payroll tax returns that you filed during 2019 that you could easily support your payroll costs. So taking your total gross wages for 2019 and divide by 12 gives you your monthly average cost. What are those additional costs? Well, what are the costs that make up the payroll? You can see there the wages, salaries, commissions, cash comp. These are capped at $100,000 annualized. This is a question that we've gotten a lot as well. What is considered in that cap? Do you also factor in any additional benefits in the bullet points below into an individual salary that could potentially put them over the $100,000 of compensation? The answer to that is no. This is gross wages, which kind of falls under the cash compensation. So it's gross wages is where your $100,000 cap is applied to. And then any benefits related to that individual that are health care, vacation, medical leave, retirement benefits, the state and local taxes, all of that is on top of that $100,000. So these are the costs that roll up into there. The local state taxes on the compensation, you notice there's nothing federal in there, so you don't include any federal taxes. It is just your local and state. More likely than not, the employer does not have any local or state taxes. You can include state unemployment taxes that would be included in this calculation for payroll costs. And then computing the payroll for an LLC member. So LLC members receive guaranteed payments. They're not receiving payroll. They're not part of the payroll function. So this is a question we've been getting a lot as well. So we believe, and our approach to this is that you would take the total guaranteed payments and the allocation of the earnings for the company. So after the guaranteed payments, what's left that flows through to the owner, that plus the guaranteed payments, all of that is subject to the self-employment tax. That would be the amount of payroll cost that would be attributable to that individual, capped at $100,000, of course. If you have more than one LLC member, then you would prorate that you would prorate the allocation of the earnings among each of the part of the members of the LLC, and then analyze each one of those for the guaranteed plus their allocated earnings to determine if they are over the $100,000 threshold. Hope that was clear. next one, Kaylee. Okay, so now forgiveness. This is one that we haven't gotten there yet, right? But everybody wants to know the answers. Unfortunately, there's still some vagueness around some of the calculations here, but I'll go through what we know as of now. So they outlined that 75% of the loan proceeds have to be spent on payroll for you to be eligible for any forgiveness. They came up with this 75%, which is kind of based off of 8 weeks versus the calculated loan amount, which is over a 2.5-week period. If you break that down into the days, it comes out to approximately 74%. They rounded up to 75%, and that's how they came up with 75% must cover payroll costs to be eligible for the forgiveness. So the loan amounts will not be forgiven if you are not able to maintain your staff and your payroll. The whole purpose of this loan, as Chad had mentioned earlier, is so that we can maintain our employee levels and not burden the unemployment system. One way to do that is to give the money to the companies to keep them employed. So when we're calculating the forgiveness, there's two things you have to think about that are going to play hand in hand, and that's the number of staff. Your loan forgiveness will be reduced based off of the decrease in your full-time equivalent headcount. So you have your employees compared to the previous year as to the time period of the 8 weeks from the time you close on your loan. You're going to be able to measure the number of employees you had in that 8 weeks to the prior year. The dates are out there as well as to what you got to measure that by. And you also got to maintain a level of compensation as well. So during that 8-week period, you're going to take the compensation, payroll costs, as it relates to that 8 weeks as compared to the prior year as well. Those two factors will come into play. It'll come up with a percentage, and that percentage will be the amount of loan proceeds that you'll be able to have forgiven. There's an exemption to those two tests, and that is the rehiring of your employees that maybe you had laid off previously. So if you can bring your employee levels back to the same level they were prior to February 15th, if you bring it back to that level at June 30th, then you'll be able to potentially have full forgiveness. One thing that I want to point out, though, is that on the FAQ that Chad had mentioned that came out from the U.S. Treasury, in there they even specifically said, and actually wasn't the FAQ, it's the interim financial guidance that came out from the Treasury. In there, they specifically said that there will be additional guidance coming out on the loan forgiveness. So right now, there's a little bit of vagueness. I know everybody's going to have a lot of questions around this, the what-if scenarios. We're not 100% sure, but we do anticipate to get answers in the coming days, hopefully weeks, over how to figure out exactly what will be forgiven. Next slide. So if you guys think about it, your bank or your lender has to meet certain underwriting requirements. So you're probably wondering why they're asking for certain information. Well, they're still trying to cover their requirements as it relates to the banking world. So they're going to ask for proof as to how if you were in operation on February 15th, support for the dollar amount, calculation of your monthly payroll costs, and the employee account that made you eligible for the loan itself. Next one, Kaylee. Thanks. So for everybody that's applied already, you already know these things, but you probably question a lot of what they're asking for. We are seeing that each of the banks is asking for something different. There's some consistency in some items, but not in everything. The time period that they're asking for, some are asking for all of 19 and the first quarter of 2020. mostly for due diligence, I believe. But here's a list of what they're more likely than not to ask you for, and that's your payroll tax filings for 2019, verification of documents for employment. Remember, one of the requirements here is that your employees actually have a primary residence in the U.S. So they're looking for some of that too. They may be testing some of that. W-2s to support wages, other documents that would support some of the payroll cost items, like the benefits side of it, insurance invoices, the retirement contributions, Form 1099s for any independent contractors that would be included in there, although we don't believe too many independent contractors are included since they are eligible to file on their own. So that wraps up my section. Got through it a lot quicker this week than last week. A lot less to worry about. So I'm wrapped up. I'm going to kick this one back to Tom. I think we have another polling question. Tom?
Yes, thank you, Steve. And yes, the next polling question is on the screen here. Again, kind of along the same line we were looking at before, where your business has been certainly impacted by the crisis. We're wondering if any of you are seeing any opportunities coming about as this disruption. We know some manufacturers have been able to kind of retool to make other needed products. So that's our question for you. Have you seen any opportunities? And our choices are yes, we've already changed direction to create those opportunities. Not yet, but we're certainly actively looking and thinking about that. And no, we're just trying to keep our heads above water with where we're at today. So if you would put your answers in, and we'll have the results here for you in just a second. Okay, again, it looks like a few of you have been fortunate enough to retool and are already looking at some new opportunities, but the majority is certainly thinking about that, and that's certainly something we'll talk about next week and hopefully have some ideas for you, not only specifically what those opportunities are, but how you might go about having that thought process to identify those. And then about a third of you are, just trying to get through this. And we know certain industries certainly have been hit hard by this, especially those that in our various states we've been forced to shut down and are not currently having operations in place. So everybody's at a little bit different stage in this. We hope to help out each of you. So with that, I'm going to move it over to Christy Weierbach, who's going to give you some updates on what's going on with the workforce situations. So, Christy?
Hi there. Welcome, everybody. After last week's town hall, I did some digging, some research. A couple people have helped me to narrow down Laura, Gaby. So I just want to circle back to one of the hottest questions last week, and it was all about salary exempt individuals and what can we do as far as reducing their pay if they're making themselves available intermittently. Initially, my gut instinct was like, you can reduce for full day increments only, because the majority of time that's the rule that the Department of Labor really enforces as part of the Fair Labor Standards Act. However, there is one small piece of legislation. It's actually in an e-law alert, and it does, for FMLA purposes, allow you to reduce pay intermittently so long as you have an arrangement or agreement with an employee. So that was good news. And if you have somebody who can work a little bit from home, teleworking, and then have to maybe take care of a child or take care of a parent, and you need help with calculating what the salary should be in a reduced calculation, let us know. We're happy to walk through that with you. I don't want to spend a ton of time on here today, but there is an attorney that we did see guidance, Gibson Dunn. They had actually put out an article indicating that this could also apply to the paid sick leave portion as well. I haven't seen it in black and white from the Department of Labor, so I would tend to believe that we would be able to have this exception within the whole Families First Corona Response Act, but just wanted to share that in case it's helpful with you, circle back on that, wanted to have a little bit of closure on it. And so please let me know if you have any further questions about that. So another common question I get is about unemployment. States are at different places with the unemployment. They've seen extraordinarily high amounts of claims coming into their systems. They're hiring new staff. They have delays as far as when the payment's going to get to our employees. So, that's really not a good place for our employees to be. And in some cases, employees are saying, look, I'm scared. I don't want to come to work. We've had a positive testing here at my place of employment. While I appreciate and I can respect their caution and concern, it does not allow them to just voluntarily not work and then take advantage of unemployment. So I lean on the rule with unemployment that if you as an employee don't make yourself readily available to work, then you would disqualify yourself potentially from unemployment benefits. So if you have an employee that after this governor's directive, you start up operation and they refuse to come in, they probably won't get unemployment. So everybody's like, oh, well, the government's giving us an additional $600, right? The federal government saying, in addition to what employees normally get with the state unemployment benefit, now we're going to put on top of that another $600 per week. Very attractive. To some employees, it might be more than when they actually work, especially if, they're at a lower end of the hourly rate scale. So, yeah, while that is attractive, employees can't just choose to be on unemployment. And this is really to help employees continue having income through a very difficult time. So if you have specific situations and you want to chat more about it, please let me know. But that was one thing that I wanted to talk through. Real quick, difference between furlough and layoff. We continue to hear that. Furlough is more short-term. So we're closing till the end of April because of the governor's directive. We will call you back as soon as we get the green light to open our doors. That's a furlough. Typically, you keep benefits intact and just bring them right back onto the payroll once the directive is lifted. If you're in a different situation and it's going to be more permanent, you're not quite sure how the work is going to come back through your organization from your clients, supply, demand, and so forth, you might be in a position where you have to do something more permanent. And at that point, it might make sense to shift employees to a COBRA status with their benefits and so forth. So wanted to hit on that a little bit. Kaylee, if you would please go to my first slide here. This is another topic that has caused so much confusion. And in my attempt to try to clear it up for you, make it a little more simple, put it on a slide. Any of these things that I'm going to talk through, you can find on the Department of Labor's website in their FAQ under the Families First Corona Response Act. So feel free to go to that document. Specifically for this slide here, questions number 58 and 59 do give a lot of detail. So I'm a small business. I have less than 50 employees. What does this mean to me? I heard I could get an exemption. What does that mean? Well, initially I believe it's question number 4, it says small businesses might be able to claim an exemption from offering paid sick leave and Family Medical Leave Act, the emergency extended portion. Well, to some extent that's true. They then gave further guidance and narrowed it down in questions 58 and 59. You'll see that at the bottom of the slide there. And now they're saying there's a few situations, yes, you could be exempt, and there's a few situations, no, you're not. So let's walk through that here. So on the left-hand side, I have paid sick leave, PSL, and if you're a small business, you cannot get an exemption from the requirements of paid sick leave if you have an employee who is unable to work due to COVID-19. So that means that they themselves have tested positive, they have symptoms and their medical professional had told them to stay home, or maybe they're in one of those highly sensitive categories where they already have underlying health conditions and so forth, and their medical provider is making them stay home. So that would be a reason why you would have to still be responsible for paying that. In addition, maybe they have to stay home with a parent, a child who has tested positive for COVID-19. So in that case, yes, you do have that outlay of cash where you have to pay them that paid sick leave. However, you get to take 100% of that as an offsetting credit against your payroll taxes. So to you, it's not an additional expense to your organization. It's really more of a pass-through where it's really just an exchanging of cash. Timing could be a little bit of a challenge for you, but for the most part, you'll be whole for providing that benefit to the employee. Now, where you do have the opportunity to claim an exemption, and within questions 58 and 59, it talks about the criteria for you to self-identify, do I qualify for a hardship and I don't have to offer these pieces of the paid sick leave and the extended FMLA. So if you have an employee who has a child that can't go to school because it's closed, or it's a child, maybe they're under the age of 5 and their child care provider is not available. So if you have that circumstance, you do not have to provide them any paid time off. Now, they can use time off that they already have under their normal company plan, but you don't have to do anything up and beyond an additional. Where on the left side of the screen, that paid sick leave, that is 80 hours in addition to what you already offer as a company. So on the right-hand side of the screen, if it's related to a child school closing or child care provider, and the DOL does define what qualifies as a child care provider. That's also in the FAQs. It's not just my neighbor, but it could be a relative who has to quarantine themselves. So in those cases, because it might cause a hardship on your organization, you do not have to offer that. So hopefully that provides a little bit of clarity for you. Happy to answer any follow-up questions that you might have on that. And one thing that I do want to talk through as well, and then I'll hand it back over to Tom, is when an employee actually comes back to work, they've been on layoff status, we're now able to open up. Now what happens if they come to me and say, hey, I need time off because now I'm sick. I didn't get sick in April, but now I'm sick in May. So Kaylee, if you'll forward that slide, thank you. So what happens is, an employee is going to come to you and say, hey, I need time off. They're either going to give you something verbally, send you an email, or whatever that might look like. And then you as the company have to decide, are they eligible? Do I have a responsibility as the employer, and so forth. So some clients have already kind of mimicked the normal process that you would follow with the Family Medical Leave Act, the original FMLA. But to some of you, if you have less than 50 employees, you've never really had to go through that process. So that would be new and different for you. So what I did here on this flow chart was outline the process that's normally used with FMLA. You can create your own form because right now Department of Labor has not created any additional form for us to use for COVID-19. So I think it'll come probably. And some companies have said, you know what, even though this isn't really the normal FMLA, I'm still going to use those forms because it's helpful and it gives me at least documentation rather than creating my own. So it's your choice. We're not telling you either way what you have to do. But let's walk through this diagram here. So employee submits the request to you. You let them know what their responsibilities are. And simply, all you have to do is give them a copy of that poster that you've already made available on April 1st. Now, if it's somebody coming back who was laid off, maybe they didn't receive it yet. But essentially, that covers exactly what they're eligible for, the criteria that has to be met, and so forth. So once they say, hey, this is my situation, you then verify, does it meet the criteria? Are they sick themselves? Have they gotten a quarantine order by their medical professional or some other federal, state, or local agency? Are they taking care of a family member? Are they having to stay home now because their child care provider got sick from COVID-19 or their school is done for the entire year? So if they meet that criteria, then you'll walk through and say, yep, your time is approved. This is what it's going to look like. You're going to communicate to them, the compensation that's associated with that. And you should track that within your normal time and attendance system because there's going to be payroll credit opportunities for you by providing the paid sick leave or the extended FMLA leave if you're required to do so. So you just follow that process. It's a lot of communication. What does the employee want? Does it meet the criteria? Do I, as a company, have the responsibility? If so, hey, employee, this is why it's approved. Let's say the employee comes to you and says, I'm scared, I'm staying home, I'm not coming to work. Well, that doesn't meet the criteria. You deny their request and say, I'm sorry, but we can't accommodate that request. We expect you to report to work at your regular schedule. And then if they fail to show up, you follow your normal company policy, how you would handle somebody who is a no-call, no-show, refuses to come to work, etc. And the key, documentation, record conversations, and just make sure that you can support having to respond to an unemployment agency or maybe somebody else that knocks on your door. But hopefully that was helpful to kind of give you a process to walk through, because over the next couple of weeks, maybe we'll be able to start going back to some normalcy, and you probably will receive a few requests if you haven't already for paid sick leave. So that's really all I wanted to share today. I do have one last note I wanted to tell you. I just looked at my notes here. So if you are applying for the PPP loan, Paycheck Protection Program loan, then you can use that to pay for an employee who might be off on vacation. If they are off due to other FMLA reasons, you can actually use that if they have to take time off for their family. So let's say that the employee exhausted their 80 hours of paid sick leave. They now want to take their other available paid time off that they had. So you can use that PPP loan to help pay that and then get forgiveness for it, assuming you meet all the other requirements of the PPP loan. So wanted to leave you with that. Tom, I'm going to turn it back over to you and then join you again at the end for some questions.
Okay, thank you, Christy. Certainly a lot of information there that people have really been curious about, and thankfully it continues to get a little bit clearer as we go. I wanted to do kind of the same with the things, the new tax provisions that have come out. I think I've hit them in a lot of detail in the previous session. So I just wanted to kind of run through them again and just highlight where more information has come to light over the past week that helps us understand things a little bit better. And I know some of these were questions that folks have had as well. So as it relates to the CARES Act and some of the tax provisions that were in there, as we've said, the biggest dollar costs from a tax perspective in there are the direct payments to taxpayers. Been a lot of talk about that over the last couple of days and weeks, and we're now at the point where we are expecting to see those payments come out very soon, possibly within the next 2 weeks. They will be direct deposited to people's bank accounts where the IRS and the Department of Treasury have the direct deposit information. They have been promising us for about a week plus that there will be a portal launched at the IRS website in order for us to insert direct deposit information if they don't have it on hand. Unfortunately, that has still not launched unless it launched since we went live today. Because quite honestly, I checked the IRS website right before we came online today, and it just says to continue to look for that. I did hear some talk of it on the news. But if you are in that situation where you think you're going to be getting a payment, or you know someone that is, and your direct deposit information is not there, keep watching for that. As soon as we know something on that, we'll share that with you. I wanted to walk back on something I actually said last week. When we met last week, the guidance that was coming out from Treasury was that if you did not file a prior year tax return, that you should file a 2019 return in order to get the payment. Well, they've stepped that back and said if you're a Social Security recipient, we certainly already have your information. We even have your direct deposit information because Social Security checks are direct deposited. So you do not need to do anything further. They did say if you are someone who hasn't filed a return because of your income level, and for whatever reason the federal government would not have your information on hand, then you may want to file a return. But I'm really kind of trying to rack my brain to say who would that even be. But if you think you fall in that category, I guess the safe route is file a tax return, put some direct deposit information in there, even if you don't have any taxes. But I think that really shrinks that down to a very small number of folks. As I said in the opening, there's a lot of chatter right now that we may have round 2 of the direct payments to taxpayers. We haven't even gotten the first round out yet, but there is some discussion that another round may come a little bit later in the year. And the last point I would make on this is, we've touched on this briefly in prior sessions too, is, will these payments be taxable to me? Well, they certainly will not be taxable at the federal level, as in essence they are, just an advance payment of federal monies. Typically that does not become taxable to you. But what about the states? Well, we do not anticipate the states to tax this either, but as I've warned many times, don't take anything for granted with the states. Now, I know the state of Pennsylvania just came out today and said they will not tax them, but we have to take that on a state-by-state basis, as certainly there's no one blanket rule by state. So we'll keep our eyes open on that. Another area of the CARES Act that I think has been getting a lot of attention and people have a lot of questions is the employee retention tax credit. Now, this is to not be confused with those tax credits that Christy just talked about for the paid sick leave. This is over and above that. The employee retention tax credit is a refundable credit versus employment taxes. You can get up to 50% of the wages paid to your employees, up to a maximum of $10,000 of wages or $5,000 of credit per employee. But to do that, you have to meet a number of requirements. Number one, you cannot be using a Paycheck Protection Program or an emergency injury disaster loan. If you're opting into those programs, you cannot also take advantage of this. Some people have asked us, well, which way should I go on that? I think you have to look at that on a case-by-case basis. But my overall feeling on that, my feeling for the majority of folks, the PPP loan is probably going to be better because you're getting 100% forgiveness for 8 weeks on your payroll and those other costs that Steve and Chad told you about. But you may want to look at that. If you're not falling into the PPP, maybe you're not eligible because you have too many employees. Then the criteria for using the employee retention credit is you have to meet one of two circumstances. Your operations either have to be fully or partially shut down during the crisis. That may be because of a state or local mandate. Or even if you're open, if your gross receipts decline by more than 50% when comparing to the like quarter 1 year ago, you are still eligible for this credit. Now, how does the credit work? Well, there's a difference there on whether you're over 100 employees or less than 100 employees. So let's start if you're less than 100 employees. If you meet one of those two criteria and you are not using the PPP loan, with less than 100 employees, you may take the credit on all wages paid. That includes while you were shut down as well as when you come back and open the doors, as long as those receipts do not exceed 80% of the prior quarter. So we may be under, we may qualify by going under 50% in quarter 2 of 2020. We may be at about 60% in quarter 3. Well, we still haven't hit that 80 marker. Even if we go over 80 in the fourth quarter, we're going to qualify because it doesn't kick you out to the quarter afterwards. Now, the program stops at 12/31/20, so that would be the end date. But remember, it's only on the first $10,000 of wages paid to the employee after the effective date, which is March the 13th of this year. So anyone making, $40,000 a year or more is making, about $10,000 a quarter. So they're going to max out fairly quickly on that. But nonetheless, it is available in those situations. If you're over 100 full-time employees, then the credit is only available for that time you are paying the employees while you are shut down. So it's a little bit of an incentive if you can't take advantage of any of the other programs and you do want to keep cash flow coming into your employees and you have the ability to do so, to get a credit for 50% of that cost. There is immediate relief, immediate possibility of getting those monies, and that is by shorting your Form 941 deposits. Remember, you're still going to withhold Social Security, Medicare, and federal withholding from your employees. You're still going to have those costs that you need to remit, but you can net against that the credit that you've calculated. If the credit still exceeds that payment, the IRS has come out with a new Form 7200. I don't believe this was out yet when we met last week, so this is something new. The Form 7200 is just a one-page form where you reconcile the amount of your credit, you tell them what you've calculated, you subtract from that what you've already gained relief from the 941 deposits. You actually fax it in. There's a fax number on it, and we've been told, we'll see how it works, I don't think anyone's done this yet, that you will have that money refunded to you within about 2 weeks. What I find interesting on the Form 7200 is it didn't have any spot on there to provide direct deposit information. So typically when it's an actual check, it takes a little bit longer. So we'll see how that works. Also key there, as I said, this is in place for wages paid from March 13th forward. That's in opposition to those other programs Christy talked about that didn't start till April 1. Well, obviously, March 13th is in the first quarter, but the guidance that just came out said, don't worry about it when you file your first quarter Form 941 payroll taxes. This will all be reconciled on the second quarter Form 941. So I'm sure there's going to be more to come on this. The IRS website does have a pretty good FAQ on this topic. I'd encourage you to go there. If you go to www.irs.gov, again, you're going to see the coronavirus link right on their main page, and it's going to take you to a lot of resources there. It's fairly easy to find. The CARES Act also allows employers of all sizes to delay paying the employer's share of Social Security tax for 2 years. Again, you're prohibited from doing that if you're taking the PPP or the EID L loan. But again, if you're a larger employer or for whatever reason you don't take the loan, you can take advantage of this election as well. Here again, you're going to have to pay those taxes. This is not a forgiveness or a deferral. It's just you can push them out till the end of half of it at the end of 2021, the other half at the end of 2022. That's a good deal. Certainly time value of money comes into play there. But as you look to the future and you look forward, don't forget that that bill is coming due a little ways down the road. So we want to make sure we have funds still on hand to do so. Other items that were in there that I'm just going to actually run through the list, I'm not going to talk in detail, is much more liberal net operating loss rules for both C corporations and pass-through businesses as it comes over to the owners. If you are in a loss situation for 2018, 2019, or 2020, you certainly want to talk a little bit more about that with your tax preparer because there may be some refund opportunities there. For larger companies, in 2019 tax returns, that's defined as 26 million or more of gross receipts. The interest deductibility thresholds have been raised. If you were on your 2018 return limited as to how much interest you could deduct by the new rules, there's some changes to that for 2019 and 2020 that's a little bit more liberal in taking the deduction. We talked about this one last week and I actually had a couple of questions on it. They did put the fix in for what was known as the retail glitch, and that has to do with qualified improvement property, which is basically non-structural improvements to the inside of buildings, whether they be retail establishments, but also office buildings, warehouses, factory buildings. We no longer have to depreciate that property over 39 years. In some cases, we may be able to take a tax deduction for that immediately. That is retroactive to September 27th of 2017. So again, if you've done any work on your buildings, you might want to check your depreciation schedules, see how that's being depreciated, and look into this. We talked in the past about excise tax exemptions were being given to distillers who had changed their operations from making alcohol to hand sanitizer. We had talked about some extensions and deferments of excise taxes for the aviation industry. There were a couple more industries added to that list over the past week. Just looking at our attendees, I'm not sure that hits anyone real directly, but if you do pay federal excise taxes, certainly worth a look at that. On the individual level, as we talked about, we can now take $100,000 out of a qualified retirement plan without penalty. You will have to pay tax on that money over 3 years. However, if you're able to restore that money to your plan in that period, you can avoid the taxation on that. So that might be a quick source of cash if you really, are in a cash flow pinch. Those that are age 72 and over that are forced to take money out of their retirement plans each year and pay tax on it, those required minimum distributions are waived for 2020. If you don't need that money, you don't have to take it. You don't have to pay tax on it. There is a $300 deduction available for all of us above the line this year for charitable contributions, and also for those that do significant charitable contributions and itemize their deduction. There is no limit on that for this year. Another one that got a little bit of play last week, some questions, is yes, your employer may pay up to $5,250 on your behalf for your student loans and qualified education expenses. That is for payments incurred from the date of the act, March 27th, through December 31st of this year. So if your employer is so inclined to supplement your education, and that doesn't have to be current education, it could be student loans that are already in place, they can pay that deduction, or they can pay that expense, take a tax deduction for that, and it's not taxable income to the recipient. As I throw out this warning all the time, and I'm going to hit on it again in a couple other topics, we are talking about federal taxes here. Beware of how the states treat all of these items. The states are always going to be a little bit of a step behind in announcing their treatment, because obviously they have to digest what the federal has put in front of them. So typically the federal is the big chunk of the taxes, and if we can take advantage at the federal level, even if we get hit with some state taxes, it's typically a good deal, but we don't want to trip up on the state side. Just a note or two here about the Payroll Protection Program and some of the things that Steve and Chad talked about, and that's in regard to the taxation of the loan forgiveness. A lot of people seem to still be struggling to get their arms around this, but yes, that 8-week period where you are forgiven the loan amount for what you've paid in payroll, what you've paid in rent, what you've paid in mortgage interest, and other qualifying costs, utilities, is not taxable for you at the federal level. However, those payments are still deductible. So it sounds like a great deal, does seem to be a really great deal. In essence, you are being funded for 8 weeks and still get to take your tax deduction, but not pay tax on the other side of that equation. Again, don't assume it will not be taxable at the state level. Make sure state by state you are very clear on what the state says. And quite honestly, I've not seen any state make a statement on it just yet. But again, very good news there at the federal level. A couple of notes on the tax filing deadlines. Again, I think you're all very much aware that the individual income tax filing deadline, payments due, first quarter estimates have been extended to July 15. They keep adding some other returns to that, such as the gift tax return. But we still have those things that can maybe be kind of gotchas. And one of them is your second quarter